Möbis. Möbis. Möbis.
Well, greetings, my friends. I hope you're all doing well. My next guest is a familiar one. We last spoke to Yuri Pankratov after he released his first book, The Solar Way. It was a fascinating translation by a fascinating Russian writer named Nina Rudnikova. Well, today we pick up with Yuri in his continued quest to translate these nearly lost treasures of Russian esoteric literature with his newest book, The Encyclopedia of Occultism, with the all important subtitle of Hermetic Initiation Through the Major Arcana of the Tarot, or the Tarot if you prefer that pronunciation. Now, I say the all important subtitle because that says it all. This book is very interesting. It elevates the tarot, however you prefer to say it. It elevates it way beyond being a simple parlor trick, even way beyond something to be used for personal divination. And it discusses this work as a symbol of archetypal symbols that will lead us right from the ground foundation of being a stinky lost human being all the way up the chain to full-blown enlightenment. Now, I use a little humor with my tone here, but in all seriousness, it is a fantastic work, a fascinating work. The kind of work, it reminds me somewhat of Meditations on the Tarot, and there is a connection in here that Yuri and I get into during the interview. It is a book just so deep and just so multi-layered and just so packed full of insights and just transformational ideas that I haven't really encountered too many books that are just so dense with explosive ideas. Every sentence counts in this book. You read one page and you have to sit for a while and digest it and really think about it. When you return to that page, and I'm speaking from personal experience, when you return to that page a couple days later, a couple hours later, a couple days later, maybe a couple weeks later, you're going to find something totally new. Because you've changed, and the way you see the book has changed. You figured some things out, but everything you figure out only opens more doors. I mean this in a good way. This is a book that takes you on the high path, man, the high path to understanding. Or at least we hope it does, right? I won't know until I get there. As of right now, I'm just a lost seeker stumbling through the wilderness. But I found this book to be very, very helpful and truly profound. And that's a word that I do not use lightly. There's not many books that I would call truly profound, and I put this one up there. So anyway, that's enough yammering. Let's get into this conversation with Yuri Pankratov about his latest book, The Encyclopedia of Occultism, Hermetic Initiation Through the Major Arcana of the Tarot. Thank you very much, friends. I hope you're all doing well. Yuri, привет, мой друг. Как дела?
Добрый день, Jeff. That is to say, good day, Jeff. And thank you for having me on your podcast again.
Пожалуйста, пожалуйста. It's my pleasure, man. It's my pleasure. So, this book, it has a really fascinating history. In some ways, I think the history and the drama behind the book might be more interesting to people than the contents, or at least as interesting to people as the contents. I know I personally found it inspiring in a way and just really interesting. This book came together at one of the more dramatic moments in human history, and these people paid a steep price to keep these ideas alive. So, could you tell us a little bit about the background of this book and how it came to be?
Okay, so this text was originally written in the early 20th century, in about 1912, in St. Petersburg, Russia. It's basically a transcription of a series of public lectures on the theory and practice of occultism given by a then famous Russian occultist called Grigory Antonovich Möbis. And these lectures were compiled into a book and printed and reprinted many times until it reached us. That's the story of the book in a nutshell.
So, was the author or were any of the people associated with the author in immediate danger during the recording of these lectures that became this book?
Well, I mean, he was giving these lectures before the revolution, so he was relatively safe. Now, due to the influence of religious conservative groups in Russia, He had to have two policemen present at his lectures just to make sure that there's nothing bad going on there. But otherwise, he was safe.
Hmm.
After the revolution, however, most occultists had to either flee or go into hiding. And this particular book was preserved by those occultists that fled, more specifically by those who fled east to Shanghai. There was a big Russian immigrant community there, including esotericists. And so they preserved this book. Of course, those esotericists who fled west, mostly to Estonia, also played their part in preserving Möbius's esoteric legacy. But we'll talk about it more a little
Hmm.
later, I suppose.
Was there a connection between the author of this book and Nina Rudnikova, who was the author of your previous translation, The Solar Way?
Yes, Nina Rudnikova, the author of The Solar Way, which we talked about it before on this podcast.
Yes.
So she was a student of Grigory Möbius and worked from his teachings. She studied under Möbius before the revolution and drew from his tarot teachings. She, after the revolution, she fled the Bolshevik regime to Estonia, and she continued teaching and publishing esoteric works such as The Solar Way there. And fleeing was the right choice too, because those who remained, including Möbius himself, they didn't do very well. The new government was actively hostile to occultism, especially to Freemasons. And despite that, Möbius successfully hid from the police and the new government. He hid his identity as an occultist and continued to teach in a small circle of students until 1926, when he was betrayed by one of his students, Boris Ostromov. You know, Ostromov wanted to make a deal with the police so he would be allowed to leave Russia. So he said, I'm going to sell out all my other friends, esotericists, to you if you let me go.
Yikes.
But they didn't let him go. He was arrested with the rest of them. So it didn't work out for anyone. And
Hmm.
Möbius, and many others were arrested, accused of. He was accused of heading a Masonic organization, which had consequences at the time. He was sent to exile to Syktyvkar, beyond the Ural Mountains in the east. And we don't know when he died. Some say he died in prison in 1930. Others say he was released and he died with his wife in Veliki Ustug in 1934. There's a lot of uncertainty about that, so we don't know for sure.
Yeah, man. I'm sitting here. I have the book right next to me as we're talking, and hearing that story just gives it even more weight. Like I'm looking at it right now and thinking of the sacrifices and the struggle that these people went through to keep these ideas alive and to get this book here with me in my office, sitting next to me right now in my computer. And yeah, it gives it like an extra gravitas, like extra level of weight to it. It's that's pretty heavy stuff, man, and it's yeah, I don't know, it's a pretty heavy book.
It's quite a heavy book. No, I wanted to say these dramatic events of arrest of Möbius and other esotericists, they were novelized recently by a our contemporary Russian writer Dmitry Bykov, who himself now has to live in exile since 2022 because he said something bad about the Russian government.
Really?
So he's now living somewhere in New York City.
Is his novel in
But
Russian
yeah,
or?
it is a novel in Russia. It's called Ostromov or The Sorcerer's Apprentice. and it's kind of a fictionalized account of the events. So Merbis and other esotericists are in a circles, is the circle that studies the secrets of levitation. And there's that young idealistic man who joins the circle. And there is a Stromov who sells everyone out in the end. But yeah, it's kind of a fantasy, but it's kind of based on real events too.
Okay, and so is there a connection historically and or philosophically between your latest book, Encyclopedia of Occultism, and Meditations on the Tarot, which is kind of a classic in Christian Hermeticism and Christian mysticism in general? So was there a connection between them?
Well, the short answer is yes. The Meditations on the Tarot is a distinct work written by Valentin Tomberg in the 1960s, and it was first published after his death in 1980, and it was published in French. But the book draws on the same Russian Martinist tarot tradition that Merbis taught, and that was transmitted to Tomberg either through Merbis himself or some of his disciples. And Tomberg even makes explicit references to Merbis and Nina Rudnikova in his work. He said there was an occult circle in St. Petersburg headed by Professor Merbis. And about Nina Rudnikova said, well, who remembers names like Nina Rudnikova or Vladimir Shmakov these days? Something like that. I read that book a year or two ago. So I'm trying to quote from memory.
Right.
Well,
right.
now people remember Nina Rudnikova. Definitely they remember her now.
All right, so I know this is going to be much more difficult to encapsulate than one might suppose, but what would you say is the fundamental thesis of the Encyclopedia of the Occult?
Okay, so the book presents the major arcana or arcana of the Tarot as a structured guide and curriculum for Hermetic initiation. It presents a step-by-step approach that integrates the Tarot, Kabbalah, alchemy, and astrology, all to train the mind of the initiate. So the 22 major arcana are not just cards for divination. They are symbolic stages of an inner path of awakening. And each card encodes a universal law and, I guess, a psychological state, and also a practical task that moves the students toward initiation.
All right, and so you bring up initiation, and that was actually a question I had because Mobus has a kind of interesting way of using that term. It's not exactly the way that I hear most other people use it. Could you go a little bit into how Mobus uses the term initiation?
Okay, because Merbis gives several definitions of what initiation might be. The first one is that it's what he calls the pursuit of consciousness of life, that is to say, of awareness or wisdom, and also the pursuit of realizational power, what we would now call the power to manifest, to make things happen. So initiation is the pursuit of these two things, wisdom and power. And this initiation, it's rooted in the knowledge of the arcana, or secrets that have practical significance, the laws of the universe, if you will.
All right, and so, I really put some thought into trying to figure out how to communicate to the listeners the depth that each one of these chapters goes into with the Tarot. And I was really trying to find like a good entryway into it, because talking about it in a more generalized, kind of abstract sense doesn't really communicate the depth that this book goes into. So I thought we would start with the magician card, and if we could focus on that card, and in focusing on that card, give people a better idea for what they can expect from this book as a whole.
Oh, you're right, Jeff. These arcana are very complicated. In each chapter, you could spend months studying to extract all the possible meanings out of it. I'll try to simplify it. So, the first arcanum, it corresponds to number one and the idea of unity. Everything is one. Also, it corresponds to Hebrew letter Aleph. And the corresponding tarot card is the magician. Not fool. This is French tarot system. So the order of cards is a little different. Magician is the first card, and also strength and justice are swapped. So, the card in question, the magician, it shows a standing man. The man is holding a wand in his right hand, raised upward. With his left hand, he points to the ground. So his pose kind of reminds of the letter Aleph that's associated with this arcanum. And in front of the man, we see a cubic table where, in addition to the wand in his hand, there are three objects: a cup, a sword, and a coin or a pentacle. So what does it tell us? Tell us that the magician knows how to neutralize binaries. And for example, his body neutralizes the oppositely directed hands. And he also knows how to control the four elements with those tools. Although Möbius doesn't give an in-depth explanation of that in this chapter in the first arcanum. So the next idea of the first arcanum is individuality. The arcanum of unity is also the arcanum of individuality. The picture on the card shows a man, an individual. And so the idea is when parts connect, they form a new whole, a new individual. Möbius gives examples like that. A cell in a human body lives on its own. Many cells become an organ. They come together and become an organ that lives as a one whole system. And organs themselves build an organism, a human body, that has its own individual life. And if we combine all the living things from all the animal kingdoms and the mineral world into one system, we get a living body that's called planet Earth, on which we live. And we can see planet Earth as a living being too. And then planets cluster into systems, systems into galaxies, and so on. And you can see each level as a distinct individual being. And he goes on to say that not only do atoms form molecules and life, but groups of people can unite by a common goal and become themselves a single living individuality, a group mind, or what we call an egregore, which also acts as an individual being. So yes, individuality, the second idea. And the third idea is activity. If you look at the pictures, a magician stands in very active pose. So it's an image of an active individual being or will. And you can look at this at different levels too, the one we described. So the first arcanum also denotes an individual activity. And let's go back to binaries, by the way. Möbius gives us a binary that we need to resolve to achieve initiation. That binary is spirit, and by that he means mind, and matter, the two great opposites. So, he says, humans live on two planes, the spiritual world of ideas and the physical world of material things. To achieve self-initiation, we need to find a way to neutralize this binary. So we need to find something that connects spirit or mind and matter. You know, philosophers thought very hard on that one because the so-called mind-body problem since the 17th century, since René Descartes proposed that mind and body are fundamentally distinct, fundamentally separate from each other. So what connects them? What allows for the transition from the world of ideas to the world of material objects? And Merbis gives the answer in the first arcanum. And that's the answer that was known to occultists for many centuries. What connects them is energy. He says there is a third plane where energy creates forms. And he refers to this intermediate plane as the astral plane, whereas the mental and physical planes are the extremes. The astral is the third term. So from neutralizing this binary, we learn that there is an astral plane and implicitly that there is life energy, which is known to occultists and esotericists since time immemorial under different names like chi or ki in the East, pneuma in Greece, prana in India, and nuifre in Welsh. Not only do these things exist, but one can also participate in them and control them to some degree, and thus become an initiation. Thus becoming initiated, thus gaining the realizational power Moebius talks about, and becoming a magician himself. So you see, neutralizing binaries gives you wisdom and power.
So, in spending so much time immersed in Moebius's words and his thoughts, did you come away with a strong sense of who he was as a man, like maybe kind of a deep sense into his way of thinking, and just what his general character was?
Well, yes. I mean, he was a somewhat old-fashioned man. He was considered old-fashioned by his students at the beginning of the 20th century. So you can imagine he's even more old-fashioned now. He was, and he's also has a personality of a mathematics professor. So imagine your mathematics professor moonlighting as an occultist, and that's what you get. That's Merbis.
So, you're no stranger to mathematics and complex reasoning and such. But there were some concepts in the book that I found pretty challenging to grasp, pretty challenging to really understand. And I'm wondering, it was probably doubly difficult for you as you were, trying to do this through translation. And so I'm wondering, were there any concepts in the book or anything that you encountered that you found difficult to understand, much less translate?
Oh. I want to say yes. Some parts of this book are very cerebral, and some people might like it, others will not. It's just what it is. And you can expect to encounter in this book different Kabbalistic mappings on the tree of life. You'll find numerology and gematria, very complex diagrams that combine the tarot, astrology, alchemy, and the elements. And Merbis often uses archaic and French Martinist terms that nobody understands. Uh, I mean, he does borrow a lot of French words there.
Oh, really?
And yeah, there are technical methods of exercises for meditation and concentration. There are methods for manually calculating planetary hours of the day, which I think is good mental training. And there are other parts of the book that are easier to read, like the history or pseudo-history of organizations such as the Freemasons, Knights Templar, Rosicrucians, and even the Order of Illuminati, which I don't know how accurate these histories are, which is why I call them pseudo histories. But
Right.
it's a very interesting read regardless.
So, there were a few parts in the book where he was discussing things about history and prehistory, in particular ancient Egypt. And as I was reading them, I did find myself frequently thinking, I don't think this lines up with modern scholarship and modern archaeology. But I also don't really think he can be to blame for that, because they had much more limited access to information than we do now. It was at least more difficult to get it. You had to go through effort to get into that library, to get to those books, and they were relying a lot on memory, and even incorrect or not incomplete information. And so I don't think he can really be to blamed. But I guess simply my question is, did you find yourself thinking that as well as you were translating his work?
In the early 20th century, people were really cavalier with history. They just invented stuff when they felt like it.
Right. What you said about the planetary hours, it's interesting because now, there's multiple places online where you can just instantly get the planetary hours. There's a
Uh,
couple applications that I
y-
know of, and it's
yeah,
interesting,
you just go to planetaryhours.net and
right?
you got it. You got it in the table.
Right. But
But
it's interesting,
they didn't have such luxury back at the
right?
time.
Right. Yeah, and it just makes me think when you read about it's like the amount of sacrifice or work that you have to put into anything elevates its value for you. I think that's kind of a almost universal aspect of human nature. You can have two people who get the same prize, but the one who worked harder for it is going to value that prize more. And I think a lot about these kind of spiritual topics and these studies, and it's kind of interesting because we have so much more at our fingertips that is so easy and so convenient, like the planetary hours. But it's almost like it makes you appreciate it less than they would have. But like you said, it would have been a challenging mental exercise for people, and it would have been relatively time consuming. And it's just interesting because it's almost like the convenience that we have today becomes a challenge in itself because it waters down how much you appreciate the knowledge. Like, am I explaining that properly? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I guess we're spoiled.
Right,
We're a really spoiled generation. And people sacrifice their lives to keep the tradition alive, to keep that golden thread going. And
right.
we got it easy. Our main problems, we don't know what to choose from. We don't know what system of training to choose from.
Right,
So I'm wondering, as you spent so much time translating these works, and which requires you to focus on them in a way that a person wouldn't normally focus while simply reading a book. I mean, translating, it seems like it's kind of using different parts of the mind. And so I'm wondering, as you have spent now so much time immersed in this group, this group of writers, this group of thinkers, with their works and with their thoughts, what have you found? Have you found anything affecting you on the simplest emotional, psychological levels, or maybe even spiritual levels? You read about books like the Goblin Universe, where authors spend so much time focused on certain topics that they begin manifesting certain things in their minds and maybe even in their lives. And I'm just wondering, did you experience anything of that sort, and experience any kind of internal changes as you spent so much time focused on um, these teachings?
Well, the most important thing about this book and Nina Rudnikova's book, to me, it's a complete, comprehensive worldview which explains how everything in the universe works, how things come into being, how humans fit into this overall scheme, what you can do, what you can expect from spiritual development. It's like a theory of everything, but for magic. You see, in Golden Dawn gives you technical methods for work, but it doesn't offer you a complete, coherent worldview. So this was a revelation for me. And most important thing about this book and Nina Rudnikova's Solar Way. And the other, of course, is the history of these books, a very dramatic history, and the existence of a very lively community of occultists in Russia, which I knew nothing about. And for a good reason, because they were all destroyed in Russia and had to flee or hide. That was the other thing.
So, do you get the sense that there may be any other works from this era or from this group of people that may still be awaiting translation or may still be waiting to be found?
Oh, funny that you should bring this up, Jeff. Because, okay, so this book, the Encyclopedia of Occultism and the Solar Way, they both focus on the 22 major arcana of the tarot. But what about the remaining 56 minor arcana of the tarot? Well, it turns out Möbius had a study material on them as well. And it was preserved by none other than Nina Rudnikova.
Wow, really?
Yes. She brought it with her to Estonia. And then, as she was feeling the approaching death, she died in 1940 or 1941, she gave it to one of her friends, Ekaterina Srednevskaya, who was immigrating to Latin America. And so this material traveled to the other side of the world and ended up in Brazil, where it was translated into Portuguese. But it's a whole story in itself, Jeff. We can talk about it for another hour.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. I really wanted to get into that. That is a really fascinating story, and I definitely have a lot of questions about it. But I totally respect that we don't want to get sidetracked by that too much. So, yeah, we can move on. But that does indeed sound absolutely fascinating.
So that golden thread was really thin. I just want to say that golden thread was really thin. It was down to individual people. Those lectures on the minor arcana, they were left in a desk drawer for 20 years until they were translated.
You're kidding me. That's amazing.
Yep.
It's amazing that over the course of 20 years, somebody didn't just find them and be like, oh, what is this? And just throw it away because they, didn't have any idea what it was. The fact that it just sat there.
No, I mean, it was sat in a drawer of Nina Rudnikova's friend. She just didn't know what to do with them. She couldn't understand them. Until, by chance, she met a couple of occultists from Möbius's school who explained it to them, and together they compiled it into a book and published it in Brazil. And then later it was translated from Russian into Portuguese, again in Brazil. And now I managed to translate it back, well, not back, I managed to translate it into English. And how I managed to do it is also another story. Well, I'll just say there is somebody made a Russian translation, so I cross-referenced it with the Brazilian text like a Rosetta Stone and managed to translate from Brazilian Portuguese into American English.
Oh my God.
And the book is in production and it's going to be published soon. Yes.
So yeah, I mean the contents of the books are profound, obviously. They're amazing, insightful, inspiring and such, but even beyond that, the stories behind the books, the people involved with the story, and just it's this story of intrigue and mystery and danger and tragedy, and it's just really fascinating stuff. But yeah, I'm sorry, just had to throw that in there.
No, I just wanted to say it's kind of like a magic corridor for me. You open one door and you see three more doors. It's like as I translate a book, I find more references, I find more authors, more books. It's like a never-ending cycle.
So obviously, there are a lot of people that use tarot for divination, I guess you would say. And I'm curious, do you think that this book and the contents of this book could be applied by those who use tarot for those purposes?
I mean, a deeper understanding of the underlying laws of the universe that are expressed in the tarot cards, they can help with the divination somewhat because the meaning is roughly the same. However, I gotta say that Möbius never explicitly discussed using tarot cards for divination, even when he discusses other methods of divinations like numerology or palmistry. I'm not sure why. Maybe he felt that tarot cards were too sacred to be used as a divination tool.
So you've now had two books published in what, like less than a year. You've got a third one apparently in the pipeline. I mean, that's incredibly prolific. And yeah, it's really kind of impressive. And I would think, I mean, that has to be at least a little bit mentally exhausting, right? I would assume. I mean, I've never translated much of anything unless I was just studying a language, but I would assume that this kind of intensive translation, it has to be pretty mentally exhausting, yes?
Yeah, it's this book was really mentally exhausting. I felt like a deflated balloon after that.
That's
Probably
the
next year.
definition of prolific, man. Three books in a year and a half to 2 years. That is impressive. Um, what are you going to do if you run out? Like, what if you what are you going to do if it doesn't give you another breadcrumb trail to follow to another book? That would be interesting. See where that leads you, because this, to me, it seems like it's kind of taking on its own life within your life. I mean, I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what I'll do when I run out. I know it's not going to happen for many years, so I
Mm,
feel there is enough material there.
excellent,
And
excellent. Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
when when we get there, when we get there, I don't know. Maybe I'll write something of my own.
And so, what would you like to share with listeners about your work, about the characters in that work, and the ideas contained in that work, and just anything about your latest book, Encyclopedia of the Occult?
Well, you know, Mirbis, why does he matter to us now? He showed us how to combine disciplined intellect and spiritual aspiration. And he made complex esoteric system accessible to us through careful and very detailed teaching. And he left a legacy that really reached beyond his immediate circles. Many later Russian occultists and thinkers, among them Nina Rudnikova, Valentin Tomberg, Vladimir Shmakov, Muni Sadhu, they all drew on his work, and
Hmm.
through their work, the legacy of Möbius survived both in Russia and abroad. And I
Wow.
suppose we all participate in this lineage. By reading this book, we connect to this line of tradition, of thought that stretches back in time, maybe back to the times of ancient Egypt, maybe not as far, but still. It's a good book, and I
Yeah,
think you should read it. Let's end with that.